Today we have a very interesting question that's come from one of our community members. The question is, do you think that people are fundamentally flawed and need to be fixed by meditation? Or are we fundamentally whole, but become overwhelmed by thinking, and meditation is a way of cutting through, overcoming the shrouds of thinking? So this is a very interesting question, and it's a reason that I think it's good for us to welcome for this series of talks questions from the community members who don't live here. It's quite common that people living right there in the confusion of the world offer the most pertinent, the most incisive, the most powerful questions. So I'd like to invite you to speak with your friends and family and see if there's anything that they might want to ask about this community, this training, this path. So once again, do you think that people are fundamentally flawed and need to be fixed by meditation, or are we fundamentally whole? And then meditation helps us to cut through the shrouds of thinking. And if I must answer with one of these two, and that is how the question is asked, I'm only given two options, then I would say the latter. We are fundamentally whole, and meditation helps us to cut through the shrouds of thinking, the veils of thinking. This is a good way to put it, actually. This is a very nice way to talk about it. And so, there we are. That's the answer to that question. So at this point, what I'd like to do is talk about the question, because it's such an interesting question, isn't it? It's a fascinating question. This question has run a good portion of world history. And I'd like to give a little bit of background there in order to help us to fully appreciate this question. Of course, I will ultimately be discussing it from a, quote, Eastern perspective, a Buddhist perspective, and therefore a primarily Indic perspective. But before getting to that, let's talk about the Western perspective. There's nothing wrong with learning about the Western perspective. I think nowadays we're a bit obsessed with it. And I hope that one of the things we do here is free ourselves from this entrapment, this tangle in this modern Western way of looking at the world. And can start to seems that within the Buddhist world in the West, there is one force that pushes towards just doing it in a traditional way, and there's another force that pushes for changing the Dharma so that it fits us. And again, if you only have one of these options, then I would suggest be traditional. We should have the humility to know, if the Dharma isn't working for me, then let me change so that it does work for me. Let me do the changing, not the Dharma. I will change. This is a good approach. Let me change. I, at one point, was talking to Bodhidhamma Bhante, who was the abbot at the monastery that I trained at in India, and I said, I don't know if this is working for me. I'm just not very good at this. And he said, yes, that seems to be true. And so the way to look at it is to acknowledge that you're not worthy of it. You're not worthy of this. And so you should just pray, may I be worthy someday. May I be worthy of this. May I please be worthy of this. And then you just wait until you are, and then it will work for you. Then you'll be good at it. That was extremely good advice. That was very, very helpful for me. We really have the sense nowadays that if it isn't working for me, then I will take charge of it. I will make it work for me. If it doesn't have all the components that I need, then I will add those components or find someone who has, and then it will work for me. But I'd suggest trying out a different approach. So if we have to be traditional, let's just say that we only have these two options, and we choose the traditional one. If we have to be traditional, then we're in a position to find a certain answer, a traditional Buddhist answer. And I'd like to get to that. And I'd suggest that if we can do that, then we're in a position to go even beyond that and not have to pull towards the traditional and not push toward the new, the way that I think it should be. And we can find a middle way, which would be the most productive one. And I hope that this place offers that to the world. A deep reverence. Not just respect, but reverence, humility before the traditions, and also the confidence that perhaps we can offer our own bit of wisdom. So ultimately, it's important that we look at this from this more traditional perspective, and then use that to bring forth something creative. But first, let's talk about how this has run human history in the West. So there's a certain teaching that you have original sin. This original sin theory is quite powerful. And a lot of people, good, healthy, mature, caring people, believe in this theory. And I should say, it can't be that bad of a theory, given how many of the people who I trust most believe in this. I know a lot. If I have to ask someone a really hard question, I need a great answer, or if I'm very vulnerable and I need someone who's really going to take care of me, a very large percentage of them believe strongly in this theory of original sin, that we are sinners, we are not of the same nature as God, who is inherently perfect. We are inherently flawed. And that's how it is and must be. And only through being saved from outside can we overcome our inherent, our original sin. So this was a very powerful theory in the West for a long time. And you could even say that it was the basis, if you wanted to be a little bit contentious, you could say that it is the basis of the most important book in all of Western history, the Judeo-Christian Bible. So in Europe, we dealt with this, and not only in Europe, but also in Europe. We worked with this for quite a while. And eventually, historically speaking, you have to admit, eventually people got sick of it, got mad about it. And during the Renaissance, the European Enlightenment, a number of people said, no, we're inherently good. We are inherently good. Probably the most important one was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who made that claim based on absolutely zero evidence, which is actually kind of interesting. You can read his books. I have. I actually, I'm a big fan of Rousseau. One of my main motivations for learning French was to read his writings in the original language. I'm that big of a fan. And I'm not the only one. I believe George Eliot also learned French just to read him in the original. And she was quite a mind, quite a thinker, with a vast understanding of many topics, a coherent understanding. So this is a very powerful person. And he helped us to change how we see things. There were others also. I often think of someone who you may not have heard of. You probably have heard of Rousseau. But there are a few others. I think of Francis Hutchinson as another extremely important figure in this, who in his own way said, no, we are good. We are inherently good, which is why our conscience works as well as it does. We always, upon reflecting on an ethical matter, our first reaction, our clearest, original reaction is the right one. We have a conscience, and it is perfect. We ourselves have this perfection within us. I was brought up in the Quaker tradition. In that tradition, we speak about that of God in each of us. These are some of the ideas that were coming forth at the time. And a religion, as I often say, needs to have an is and an ought. It has to say the way things are, and then it has to say the way things should be. And in particular, what you should do because of the way things are. So things are like this, therefore you should act like that. You should do these things. You should behave in such and such a way. So they added that sense of we're inherently good to a few other thinkers. Who you may have heard of or may not have heard of, Locke, Keynes, and others, who made a certain claim about what human life is all about. And their claim was that human life is all about getting stuff. And I mean it. That's what they said. Human life is all about acquiring property. That is a claim. Therefore, if we are good and we very much want to acquire property in our nature, then the acquisition of property is good. That is what good is. Now, this is quite an amazing claim, isn't it? That is what good is. And these theories led to, if you want to be a little bit contentious, you could say that they led to the writing of the most important book in all of Western history, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, who was a student of Hutchinson. And Keynes. So this idea that it's good to acquire, and these are ethical thinkers, you understand. These are people who are saying people are good. We want a good world. We want the world to be a better place. And therefore, capitalism is good. It's a good thing. We want to use it to make the world a better place. This was essential to the creation of what we now live in, of the society and the worldview in which we live. And as you may see in each of these moments in history, there's just a slight change. A group of people get together, talk things through, and then they make a slight change. They just add a little bit, and when you change the way people see things even a little bit, history changes. The direction of human civilization changes. So I'll just give one more example of this. Another Westerner named Peace Pilgrim, who also said that people are good. People are good, she said. Some of you have read her or even heard her. She's recorded. And you've heard her say, people are good. She says it sort of like that. People are good. And her evidence is that she went out without any possessions at all. And why? Because she realized that getting is, first of all, easy, and second of all, the source of suffering. Suffering is caused by acquisition of property. Well, I don't want to suffer, so she gave away all of her possessions, except for a few necessities, such as a comb. And she went out and said, I'm just going to walk and fast until people give me shelter and food. And then what did they do? They gave her shelter and food. And she was healthy, well cared for. And what does that prove? That proves that people are good. But she shifts it. And she says, what should we do? What does this goodness imply we should do? And the answer is give. That's what. Give. Giving is what makes you happy. That's why she would go out and let people give her stuff all the time. She couldn't take too much. She had to take care of herself also. Acquiring things is awful work. But she would take a little food and shelter each day. It didn't seem like too much. That was her gift to them. She let them give her stuff. She was so kind. Because she knew that it was the giving that would make people happy. It's giving that makes people happy. The same way, now we have a nice easy segue to the Buddha. The Buddha and others, notably Mahakasyapa, his disciple, a great monk, they also went out begging. And they also said, if you want to give, give. If you want to make merit, if you want to store up happiness for yourself in the future, you can give me food. I'll take it. This is compassion. Out of compassion, we go out, we put out a begging bowl, and people can put food into it. Why do we do that? Out of compassion. Because we let people give. And in particular, when people give to those who are skillful, that gives them great fruit and great benefit. Those offerings for those who give are a source of great fruit and great benefit, especially, as I say, if the person is skillful. Skillful here means virtuous, at the very least. Beyond that, it means that they can attain some supernormal, or you could say superhuman state, such as deep meditation, in which one's sense of self, attachment to desire, attenuates. And ideally that they've actually broken through to the Dharma and completely relinquished the underlying tendency towards acquisition. They've actually relinquished that. So they have completely given everything away. They have relinquished all acquisitions. When a person has relinquished all acquisitions, then to give to that person is of great fruit and great benefit. It's very, very good. So all of this is about dana. Now, dana is a Sanskrit word that is cognate with the English word donate. It means giving. So dana means that we give. And dana is the basis of the path. Giving. How to give becomes the question of our lives. How can I skillfully give? How can I skillfully relinquish? This becomes the great question. If we ask that question, if we're asking that kind of question, how to give truly, completely, skillfully, then from there we've set the stage. We have through that way of looking and way of acting begun the process of extracting the stored up tendencies that we have learned, that we have grasped, that we have accumulated, toward covering over ourselves with decorations, or you could say defilements. Covering over our minds with what we have been influenced by. As we do that, as we put ourselves in that position, then we're able to ask what may be the deep question here, a question that many of you ask, a question that many of the great masters have asked through history, and that is, so okay, you say that we're good, that we have the Buddha nature originally, our original mind is flawless. You say these things, but if that's true, then how did all of this suffering come about? How did all of this injustice come about? How did that happen? How did we move from this inherent goodness to this vast suffering and hatred and greed and delusion? How did that happen? It's a good question. We here have been studying this question quite a bit with dependent co-origination, co-arising. We've talked about this a lot. And so you have a sense of how to look at this. But briefly in summary, the Buddha offers us a radically different perspective regarding the origin of suffering. If you consider your original mind to be some sort of mind that existed in the past, back in the past, then naturally what you'll do is you'll run back into the past. And you'll search for this original, pure mind. And so you go back and what do you see? Well, you notice there's a lot of ignorance here. There's a lot of ignorance. A lot of mistakes are being made. But why? What's the source of all of that ignorance? And then you find out what it is. It's craving. That's the source of it. The craving causes the ignorance. So then you ask, well, that's good information. But what's the source of the craving? Why would I crave? And the answer, of course, is ignorance. Because you're ignorant. You don't see the way things really are, so you think you have to fix them. You have to improve upon them. That's why. I say, well, goodness gracious me, that's terrible. What's the basis? What's the source of all this ignorance? You see, it's craving. It is the very fact that I have manipulated, forced, fought, that has caused this ignorance. Oh my goodness, well, what will I do about that? And you discover that this cycle just goes back and back and back, and you do not find an origin of it by going backwards in time. This is a radically different way of looking at it than, say, we find in Genesis or we find in Rousseau's work. It's a totally different approach. Instead of that, we see that the very act of replication, of reproduction, the very act of producing a person, that act itself is this construction of ignorance and craving. That ignorance and craving, as they move in this way, produce a sense of self who moves through space and time. And so, if we look at the question as it's asked, it's actually quite interesting. Is a person inherently flawed or inherently whole? It's actually an interesting question, isn't it? Because it assumes something. There's an assumption here. There's an assumption of person. Person is assumed in the question, isn't questioned in the question. There is a person, and now we have to figure out whether that person is whole or flawed. But what would happen if we didn't find a person? What would that be like? What would happen if we looked and looked and didn't find a person? If this person ceased? Now there's a similar question asked. There's someone who went to the Buddha and said, if you travel through the universe, will you come to the end of the universe? And the Buddha said, no, that isn't how you'll come to the end of the universe. But I also say that if you don't come to the end of the universe, the end of suffering cannot be found. Therefore, I tell you that the end of the universe is found right here in this body. Now, what will you do with that? So at this point, we're trying to find the original mind. We're trying to find the end of this vast suffering, this problem, the end of birth and death. And yet somehow it isn't found by going backwards or forwards in time. It isn't found by moving through space. Because we see that the whole sense of space and time is experienced by a person, but the sense of a person is produced by ignorance and craving. Now, if we discard ignorance and craving, then what will we say about this question? How could we possibly answer it? If all of those influences are lost, are let go of, are relinquished, are dropped, then how could we possibly answer this question? How would we even approach this question? But that relinquishment is what is meant when we talk about some original mind. Therefore, it's our job to cut away everything that is produced, everything that is caused, everything that is the result of production, of construction. All of these things that are brought into being, that's exactly what we let go of. That is the path. The path is that we let go of all of that. When we let go of all of that, nothing is found. Nothing is found at all. When we look at another example of this, we see a certain person, famous Zen master named Ano. Is it Huineng?
Yes.
So he was a young monk, basically, and he went to a teacher, and he started training. And that teacher said to his disciples, please write a poem about the path, about awakening. And there was one excellent poem that was written. And the master there approved it and told everyone that they should memorize it because it's such a good poem. And I would recommend that you memorize it because it's such a good poem. Actually, two poems in this story, and if you have to memorize just one of them, obviously you should memorize the first one. It's an excellent poem. And it says, the body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is the stand of a mirror bright. We must wipe it, clean it, hour by hour, to be sure that no dust may alight. This is an excellent poem, and you should learn it, because it's about practice. The body is the Bodhi tree means that this body is exactly where we practice. In this body, the end of the universe is found. The end of suffering is found. Right here in this body, this is where we practice. Don't think you're going to go somewhere else and practice. The mind is what holds this bright, this luminous mind, this awareness, this mental mind. We think it through and we understand this and that. And because of that, we're in a position to practice and reflect each thing exactly as it is, see clearly. How do we do it? By using some technique to discard the defilements, whatever it is that we have acquired, whatever it is that we have gained, whatever it is that is caused, produced, constructed, procured, all of that we wipe off, we let go of that, we dispense with it. And you'll notice with me and with others, we keep on repeating synonyms, hoping that someone will hear one of them. Because this is a radical change in how one lives one's life. And most of the time we hear a talk like this, and then we feel like, okay, I got a lot from that. That's good. I feel good about that talk, actually. I had a really good experience while I listened to that talk, and now I think I'm a better person. I got something out of it. So we try to repeat again and again, what we're advising is that you let go and relinquish and drop and shed. And then we can keep on going with the synonyms, hoping that someone will hear one of them. It's about wiping off the mirror. It's not about painting a new picture on the mirror. It's not about trying to figure out some sort of mirror that holds on to images. Not about trying to create a mirror that doesn't reflect what's before it. Instead of that, we let go and then our minds reflect exactly this, and that's all. That is all. Nothing more than that. On the contrary, it's always about going towards less than that. Less and less and less. And as we do that, we can be sure that no dust may alight. So no defilements accrue. Our minds are clear. Reflect everything as it is. Now, this is a very good poem. It's such a good poem that I hesitate to mention the second poem. Because I'm afraid that you won't hear this one. It would be very sad. The second one distracted you from this one. But I'm going to trust your integrity and your spiritual strength. So, this young practitioner, Huineng, heard this poem. And he said, "Oh, this is a great poem. That's a great poem. I love that poem. It's good that everybody's learning that poem. But it isn't spoken from the perspective of enlightenment." And of course, everybody was offended. But he offered to present another poem. And his poem was, "There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of the mirror bright. From the origin, there is not one thing. Where could the dust alight?" This is relinquishing everything. Relinquishing space and time, selfhood, possessions. This is relinquishing all of that. That relinquishing is the cessation of everything that is produced. The cessation of everything that is produced, you could call the original mind. If you wanted to, you could call it that. But if you still have some sort of original mind, then it's essential that you relinquish that you let go of that. And that letting go isn't a matter of making something up, producing something, acquiring something. It's about seeing, directly seeing the truth. Directly experiencing that supreme happiness, supreme peace, so that your underlying tendency to fix it is relinquished. Your underlying tendency to make it be the way you want it to be. That is exactly what is relinquished. When we do that, then we see that all of this was made up. All of this is ignorance. It's based on ignorance. Comes forth out of ignorance. Results in craving that, again, cycles back into ignorance. That letting go is a letting go of everything, and I'd suggest that we understand it in that way. We understand that we're letting go not only of our bad habits, but also of our ways of seeing the world. We're letting go of our cultural assumptions. We may think in terms of these theories that have been given to us over the centuries. As we see, they're added on to and adjusted as time passes, and a lot of what we try to do is fix them so that they'll be better. But at least while we do this training, what's important is to relinquish them, not to fix them, but to let go of them, so that we actually remove those assumptions from our minds, and therefore from our lives. When we do that, we remove our lives from the systems that function based on those assumptions. That is the essential part of this training. When we do that, we experience something that isn't produced. And you could call that metaphorically the original mind. You could call that what we fundamentally are. That's okay to use those words as long as we understand that we're not talking about what, and we're not talking about we, and we're not talking about something fundamental. Everything is produced by something else. Absolutely everything that arises is based on something else. There isn't something fundamental on which everything else is based. Everything is produced in relationship with something else. When we see through that, when we cut through that creation, then we see that which is not created. We see that which is not born. We see that which is not produced. We see that which does not come into being. We see that which is not manifest. That, if you wish, you could call the original mind. The thing that we fundamentally are. But if you're going to call it that, then it's essential, it's all the more important that you've seen through each of those assumptions, so that you're in a position to know whether presenting things in that way will be of benefit to people. In that way, we're in a position to create a new world, a very different world, a world based on the Dharma, a world based on the truth. That is our opportunity. But please know one last thing. This fundamental thing that we are, and I again warn you as I say that, you should look closely at each of those concepts. This original mind, this unproduced, this unborn, that does not create the born. The uncreated does not create the created. The unborn does not give birth to the born. And the undying does not cause death. This is about liberation. And that liberation may, if we wish, allow us to produce something, to offer ourselves to society in order to give benefit to many people, give great fruit and great benefit through creating a system, a culture, a society in which we live according to the Dharma. That is possible. That can be done. And here we want to do that. We want to create a culture that's in accord with this. We want to create a monetary system that's in accord with this, that allows us to see that giving brings more happiness than getting, that allows us to develop trusting relationships, and that allows people who have relinquished to live in a safe way that influences the world, that influences society's direction. We want to create all that. That is our mission here. That's what we work on. That's what we give our lives to. And it is our joy and our honor to give our lives in that way. So let's begin first and foremost with discovering for ourselves relinquishment, letting go. That we know exactly how to do that, because it's exactly in letting go, in doing just this, that we serve all beings, that the world is saved. It is exactly that that makes the difference.